one, we see a long line, a couple of star-like things, and a lot of things swimming in the foreground. Can you describe what you're seeing?
My name is Preston Dennett. I live here in Reseda, California, work full-time as a bookkeeper, and actually do UFO investigating on the side. I became involved in UFOs and UFO research in 1986 when I found out my family, friends, and coworkers were having dramatic encounters. Couldn't believe it, changed my life, started looking into this phenomena, found out it was real. One thing led to another. I began investigating, interviewing people, became a MUFON field investigator, started writing articles for the local newspaper and various magazines, and that just kind of snowballed. And now some 35 years later, I've written a bunch of books, and yeah, I love doing this stuff. I think it's an important subject. My latest book is Onboard UFO Encounters. It's 15 chapters, each focusing on one person who's been taken on board at least once, most of them several times. But yeah, all my own research. These are kind of the most extensive types of cases I have. Because a sighting is one thing, but being taken on board, I mean, that's wild. And they've all had face-to-face contact, every one of them, with one form of ET or another. Been in this field for a while, and abductions, I think, are really the forefront of UFO research. Thinking that might not be the best word, so I like to call them, onboard experiences, because some are friendly and some aren't. And there's a definite pattern, I think, to these cases. People are often described being examined, physically examined. They describe very similar interiors, like rounded rooms, indirect lighting, this sort of thing. They all describe how the walls will turn transparent. That's very interesting to me. They describe similar control panels, but each case is unique too, and has some very bizarre elements. The case of Pat Cates from Florida, she's had a number of what I would call standard abductions, examinations by grade type ETs, but had one experience where it's like kind of a long, weird experience. I'll shorten it a bit, because she often has what she calls her UFO dreams. Amazing lady. Grew up in, I think it was Florida, and had early experiences with greys. As a 6-year-old, she saw one peering into her bedroom, and stuff like this, missing time. Started having these kind of UFO dreams where she dreamed she was on board a UFO. And was kind of putting it all together bit by bit. She's had one of her UFO dreams again, except this time she's standing outside of a UFO. She's looking over this town, this village, that doesn't look like it's in the US, because there's kind of lush foliage, and it looks like maybe a South American village or something. She's not sure. She's standing next to a blue, human-looking ET, apparently, in a blue uniform. There's a giant UFO standing next to her. There's grays around it, more of these human-looking figures in blue uniforms, a ramp, and she has this feeling there's going to be a disaster, and she's there to help rescue people from this village. She didn't question it, she just obediently followed this blue-suited figure into the village and started pulling people out. For about 2 or 3 hours, collected several hundred people, she says. None of the people protested, just followed like sheep. Nobody questioned anything. It was all very strange. There was another UFO, by the way, just a couple hundred yards away doing the same thing. She goes inside the thing, it's got multiple decks, there's all different types of Nordics, I guess you'd call them, human-looking ETs. Different races, apparently, which I thought was kind of interesting.
That they're working together.
Yep, right. So what happened was suddenly, they collected a bunch of people, there's an explosion off in the distance, and it's a volcanic explosion. and darned if this wave of ash and mud and ice and houses and bodies comes sweeping through this town and buries it. She said it was horrific to see, people dying, and this UFO, honest to God, she says, comes down and starts scooping up more survivors. Next thing she knows, that she's being set down in her driveway, which is back in the U.S. and I believe this time's Louisiana, and she goes back to bed, wakes up the next morning thinking, oh my God, this is a weird UFO dream I had. She calls up her best friend. She says, you're not going to believe this one. This is a weird one. And her friends, after listening, says, you better turn on the TV right now. Turn on the TV. And so Pat hangs up the phone, turns on the TV, and there is her UFO dream on all the channels. Eruption of Nevada del Ruiz volcano in Colombia. It killed some 27,000 people. So I heard that, and I'm opening it up, and I'm looking at the descriptions of the witnesses, and she's describing the same thing. This sent her to the doctor, actually. She was that traumatized by it, because it was not only confirmation of her experiences, but she saw all this horrific stuff. And I'm like, what do you think happened to those thousands of people? She says it was at least 1,000 probably, too, that they rescued. She's like, I don't know. They can't put him back. That would raise too many questions. But it was a weird case. I have other cases where people believe their lives have been saved by ETs, or healed perhaps. Not that they're all friendly by any means, but some are. And this case was, an outlier to a certain extent, because I've never had a case like that before. That's crazy. So that's what I mean by how bizarre it can get. There's another case in that book, Onboard UFO Encounters, where a 17-year-old kid joins the Marines with a waiver from his parents, because you have to be 18, and boom, he's stationed at Camp Pendleton, gets a top secret clearance, and long story short, finds himself part of this military project where he's taken to a hangar, sees a crashed UFO, along with several other young Marines, and they march out reptilian humanoids. It's got these 7 or 8 foot tall reptilian humanoids working along with the military. Yeah, a lot of strange cases. There's a number of cases in that book where people have physically confronted the Greys. One guy punched him in the face. He woke up while he was being physically examined, jumped up and he's like, boom, 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 and they eventually knocked him out. But same thing with another guy in England who was having some pretty scary encounters with Greys. They weren't particularly friendly. He was being physically examined, they stick a needle in his head, and he's like, stop, you're hurting me. And they didn't. And they didn't stop his pain. They showed no respect for him. So that pissed him off, understandably. And every time these Greys would appear, they'd usually knock him out, or he'd be sucked out of the room. And, has a number of cases where he's been on board the craft. But one of the really interesting things that happened was he walked down the stairs and saw a Grey. This has happened before, but this time he ran up to it and chokes it around the neck. And this its arms start windmilling around and saying to him telepathically, get off me, get off, get off, get off. And something comes and knocks him out from behind. They tried to paralyze him, but it kind of wore off. He learned how to break through their paralysis, which I have heard. And he had another incident where he woke up in his bedroom, and there was a Grey right there, and he jumps and punches this thing in the face.
Do they topple over pretty easily?
It didn't in that case. It leapt back. I have had a guy push a Grey right over and it fell onto the floor. And but he said, yeah, it was a very soft, leathery feel to it, and they made it look cute, he says, and harmless. But this one opened its mouth and hissed at him, and showed its teeth. I'm like, oh, it did.
A Grey showed his mouth opening and showing his teeth.
Yeah, and he says, it looked completely different. I'm like, what did its teeth look like? Because I've heard of other accounts like this. And he said the same thing as the other witnesses I've heard, which surprised me, describing the teeth as sharp, small, and pointy. Little pointy teeth. which is weird but consistent. So yeah, I mean, there's 15 cases in that book. Some of them get strange for sure. One guy's in the middle of an abduction and he calls upon Jesus and God to rescue him, and an angel appears. He's very religious, so maybe that plays into this somehow. I don't know, but he's like praying and praying to God to rescue him from this abduction. And he saw who he believes is the Archangel Michael and angels behind him, who took him out of the UFO. And you know, that challenges my own beliefs in this phenomena for sure. But I have to tell you, I've looked into this and I know of many other cases where religious figures have appeared. It's not super common. This is, I think, my one and only case, really, out of the many, you know, God, hundreds, of onboard experiences.
Yeah, and probably he's not the only one that prayed for someone to help them out of the situation.
I would say that that's a fair statement. This is why I think it's so interesting. You can't categorize this stuff too easily. There's another case, New Kensington, Pennsylvania, 13-year-old kid. It was 1974. He's with his 3 friends skateboarding, 7:00 p.m. The 2 kids have to go home. Their curfew is 7. His is, you know, a little later. And this UFO appears. He's in his backyard, right? And it's big, it's low. And a porthole opens up and there's 2 human-looking figures looking down. And he waves and they wave. He makes a wish, you know, take me on board. And next thing he knows, it's 10 o'clock. His friends are facing the other directions. He's facing the opposite direction, watching the UFO go away. And he's waving and they're waving. And he turns to his 2 friends, like, wasn't that incredible? And they're like, what? What are you talking about? The UFO. They had no memory of it. Don't remember even seeing it. And now it's 10, they run home, they both get in trouble. Both of them denied seeing UFO the next day. Or not denied, but they just didn't remember. You know, he tells his mom's like, I don't know what to tell you. Next morning, you know, he's really upset because his friends still don't remember. And he's telling his mom, he's like, I know I saw this. And she says, look, here's the newspaper. A bunch of people in town saw a UFO that day. None saw it as close as him, none saw humanoids. But over the next week or 2, he remembered. He remembered what happened. This is sort of something that happens. You know, people do use regressive hypnosis to recover memories of onboard experiences. In this book, only one person did. And I kind of wanted to do that because you can sort of lay to rest any explanations of false memory syndrome or hypnotically induced memories. This is all conscious stuff. And he remembered being invited on board, finds himself on board. There's two adults sitting on either side of him who appear to be catatonic. They're not responding. He's on a very... Humans. Normal humans. As far as you can tell. He's, you know, a little disoriented and he's very calm. But he's on this low bench. And there's these 2 beautiful, who he perceives as ETs, in front of him wearing, I believe it was blue jumpsuits, featureless, but one was very tall and muscular, good looking, with blonde hair and blue eyes, and the other was a lady, and she had brown eyes and brown hair, and he said they were just angelic. He's also a religious guy and feels like these are probably what people think of as angels. He loves these guys and feels like they're perfectly illuminated, enlightened beings. And they showed him around a little bit, you know, opened a porthole, wall turns transparent like it does, no frame. And he saw a star field. You know, he doesn't remember everything that happened. But it was a benevolent encounter from beginning to end.
I'll tell you what's consistent with that, with the Bob Lazar story. He definitely mentioned that at one point when he was working inside the craft, that one of the panels became transparent as well.
Yeah, it's very interesting. It's so funny to hear witnesses describing details that they have never heard before. And they're like amazed. Like one guy, I'm like, well, how is the light in the room? And this guy's from the Netherlands. Really interesting guy. ETs took him. They said, don't be afraid. We won't hurt you. Speaking perfect Danish, by the way, which I thought was kind of interesting. And I asked him, how is the room lit? And he's like, I couldn't tell you. It was all lit up. Maybe it was coming from outside the window. He couldn't describe it. And other people have never heard of telepathy, and they're like, they were talking in my mind. And they're like, so that's very consistent. There's certain details which are absolutely consistent, but sometimes no, they're just not. Some of the cases are just so wild. I mean, hybrid babies, sure, we've heard of that. At least 3 or 4 of the people in this book have met their adult hybrid children and had full-on conversations, friendly with them. One lady, I call her Lynette, she doesn't want her real name used. She had that experience, and her son, I'll put that in quotes, but no, I mean it's her son, half hybrid. Gosh, I know how that sounds to skeptics. I just cringe when I think of it, because I was so skeptical getting into this field. But yeah, she had this conversation, and he told her all these kind of information. That was just astounding. One was like, you need to tell people that the power of intention is real, and that thoughts are things, and that you are creating your reality. If you don't stop putting out the greed and negativity you're putting out, you are going to destroy yourselves like we did. This is a theme that turns up in independent cases. They told her all kinds of stuff. They said, people thought we were angels. Who you thought were angels, that was us. They said, we have altered human DNA for a very long time, and not only humans but animals. They told her specifically that they have elevated or enhanced the emotional intelligence of dogs and cats to make them relate better to human beings.
Do you know, did they say what species of alien is doing this?
This is your Greys.
The Greys.
And I hate to lump them all into one group because I don't think that's the case.
Mm-hmm.
But what you described is, Greys. So they gave her some, prophecies, like there's going to be increasingly severe hurricanes. This was like post-Katrina. They told her that, and it said it's going to get much worse, which it has. They told her there's a huge earthquake fault running down the center of the U.S. They told her people should start disappearing from our planet. It's for the, quote, universal good, which I thought was interesting, because that's a big thing right now, is people suddenly going missing. So yeah, that's an amazing case. Another lady, Dolly from Florida, same thing. The ETs came down into her kitchen. Says, I'm your son. And started saying very similar things. We're always here to protect you. They taught her how to fly the ship. That's not unusual.
When it comes to things like that, did they say it's you fly it with your mind, basically?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. That comes up quite a bit. It's not unusual for people to be taken to the control room, and often they're told, we don't use fossil fuels. Why are you? So that's a common theme. And they'll sometimes put people in the chair and here's the lever, A few people have gotten to fly it. She was one of them. Usually as a child is when they do that, which I find kind of interesting. But yeah, I think at least 5 of the people in the book were taken to what we would think of as the control room. People are often physically examined. And usually it's a table, but often it's not. People describe rather a dentist chair. That's the exact words they use over and over again. It was like a dentist chair. Wow, here we go again. 4 or 5 people said that in this one book alone. So that's what I tried to include in that book, is a lot of the different types of cases. So you have a whole bell curve. Some cases are not so nice. Some were very nice, and the whole range in between. One guy had an experience where he came upon a landed UFO, came back and told his friends, were like, really, really? He's like, yeah, honest to God. These were like a group of teenagers in a cabin in Palmdale. This was late 70s. And he said the Greys, they were great, kind of hybrid looking, almost human looking really, were very friendly, invited him on board, said they're studying this area, blah, 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 and invited him to go with them. And he declined. But they told him, we'll be back next year, at this day, if you want to come. And this is the story he's telling his friends. His friends are like, are you kidding me? He's like, honest to God, this is what happened. And so they all go home, and a year rolls around, and he starts giving away his stuff. And his friend, the guy I interviewed, comes up to him and says, are you going out there? And Paul was his name. It's like, Paul's like, yeah, I think I'm going to just see, He's like, Tony's like, are you going to go with them? Paul's like, I don't know. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. This is a real case. So Paul drives out and doesn't come back. And so Tony and his friends and Paul's family drive out there and find his car with the keys in it. Never saw Paul again. I know a Hawaiian researcher who, a lady, she was taken, never returned. I know 2 cases in New Mexico. This happened to Frederick Valentic in Australia. He was intercepted by a UFO, never seen again. Felix Moncla over Lake Superior, intercepted a UFO, it sucked him inside, and that's the end of Felix. As far as, we don't know. Like all those people in the town of Armero, thousands were apparently rescued into a UFO. We don't see them again. So all these missing people, like Lynette said, ET's told her flat out, people go missing, it's us. And we're doing it for the good. So this is how weird this phenomenon can be. Yeah, there's hybrid babies and people being physically examined, but it's much beyond that.
Was anybody ever able to describe to you any agenda? Why would they even care about, increasing our DNA, or why it is to the galactic good that they're taking people away, or any agendas at all?
I think each experiencer gets a little piece of the puzzle, some certainly more than others. One guy I interviewed, he's a Army mechanic for Special Forces, great witness. He was taken on board, and all they told him was, don't be afraid, we won't hurt you. Physically examined him, dropped him off. He got nothing, basically. Whereas others, get messages, certainly. And I think we do have a pretty good handle on the ET agenda, generally speaking. And I'm just saying this from, the people I've interviewed and from the stuff from other investigators. But what we do see is certainly an interest in physically examining people and getting reproductive material. And the message behind that has come, which is that the Greys have lost the ability to reproduce due to genetic damage and are basically trying to revitalize the race and get their emotions back as well. They made all these changes to do space travel, perhaps. This has come up in a few cases. So that's clearly one agenda. When I first got involved in UFO research, I had my own hybrid baby case. What is going on? This was before Bud Hopkins' book Intruders came out, which really kind of put this together. I'd say that there are lots of agendas. One is definitely people being taken into the control room and told how this craft works, and there are other energy sources, alternative energy. That theme, that conversation comes up again and again and again. It's one of the most common messages people get.
That the ETs are explaining that to whoever they're have aboard.
Which seems to be an interest in, stopping us from using fossil fuels or polluting our planet. They do seem to be interested in our future. They're interested in all things human. It's very bizarre. Very intently focused on us, which I don't quite understand why, unless perhaps we're their experiment to a certain extent. Mm-hmm. And I think there's some evidence pointing towards that. Some people have been told that flat out. We've got lots of weird evolutionary steps that we don't understand ourselves, considering our race, and there's definitely ancient writings which point towards us mating with the sky gods and sort of thing. But yeah, I think there's multiple agendas. Another for sure, and probably the main one, terms of people getting messages, is warnings. Warnings of nuclear proliferation, our warlike ways, our prejudices, pollution, you know, all that sort of thing. Comes up again and again and again and again and again. It's most famous abduction cases have that message in them, which I find very fascinating. And thirdly, I would say there's an agenda to wake people up spiritually. And I say that because time and time again, people come away from these experiences and they become healers. They do Reiki, or they start doing channeling, or now they're dowsers, or they start giving psychic readings. They start having out-of-body experiences. They become environmentalists. A lot of these abductees are vegetarians, too. I find that pretty interesting. So there does seem to be a spiritual aspect to this, for sure. So I think that points towards, you know, what these ETs are doing. But ultimately, we don't know. I mean, we know they're hovering over our mines. I did a study on that. They're, you know, copper mines, metal, you know, uranium mines. There's a case in Karn City, Texas. It's crazy. They drained the place of uranium, literally. Landing at, you know, a gold mine in French Gulch, up in California. I've got like 20 or 30 cases. So they're taking our metal. That's an agenda.
Really?
They're not just hovering over these. They're landing. Humanoids are being seen. They're affecting the mines themselves. Just look into the cases in Arizona, the leading producer of copper in the U.S. They are hovering over the Morenci smelting plant and numerous of these copper mines.
How many of those cases have been reported?
I know of 6 or 7 right off the bat. Some mines have been hit more than once, I mean, over and over. So that is definitely a thing. You know, we see them hovering over our nuclear power stations. We know they're mapping all of that, which I think from a military standpoint has got to freak, you know, the military guys out, for sure. And I sympathize, but I don't think that these ETs are evil. Yes, there's bad encounters. Yes, they are kidnapping people. That's a crime, and that's a real problem. But I have to tell you, when a person is kidnapped on Earth, it doesn't end well. Rarely it doesn't end well. In these cases, you know, it does. Usually end really well. People come back, like I said, spiritually transformed.
And healed.
I've documented 300 cases of people who've been healed as a result of a UFO encounter.
With blindness? Was that one of them?
Yep. You name it. I mean, we can start with
Cancer?
Cancer, 30 cases. Coming from all over the world, medically documented. There's a case up in Canada. Oh God, what's the guy's name? Jim Schaefer, I believe it is. Sent me the before and after. He sent me the doctor's reports. They didn't say alien healing, but they put like spontaneous healing, I believe is what they wrote. Healing cases are amazing. This guy Paul Schaefer had a tumor on his neck and had an encounter with an orb going into his body. He actually filmed it. Filmed this orb going into his body. I've seen the film. I believe he's posted it online. He's got a lot of evidence in his case. Some people are able to just collect a lot, and he has for sure. And I woke up the next morning, the tumor was gone. He's scheduled for surgery like in a few days. Goes for surgery and they can't find any cancer. They found necrotic tissue, and they did the operation to remove that. And he's been very upfront with his doctors. He says, listen, you know, I'm being abducted by aliens. Because he would go to them, like, here, look, my arm's cut. They broke my foot. He wakes up with a broken foot. His encounters haven't been particularly friendly, but they did heal him, and it's medically verified. And the healing cases I love, because they leave a long trail of very confused and sometimes angry doctors, because it's some of the best evidence we have for the veracity of these encounters.
What that makes me think is that they're trying to heal him for their own agenda, not necessarily to help him, but maybe they need him to live longer for some reason.
Yeah.
To harvest whatever.
Yeah, Lynette, the case of Lynette I talked about earlier, The ETs told her that. They healed her of a tumor in her lung. The doctors were going to remove a quarter of her lung. And they healed it. They said, it's to our benefit to keep you well.
That makes sense.
And a number of the people believe that to be the case. But you know what? That's just not a viable explanation in some cases. Because I've got cases of people who are very elderly. Why are they healing some 67-year-old lady in England of jaundice? I'd like to know why.
What is jaundice? I forget.
It's a blood infection.
Blood, okay.
Like, hepatitis type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Or a little girl in Brazil of nearsightedness. Or a little boy of rheumatoid fever. And maybe there's an agenda there with the future. But elderly people who are on their way out probably in 10, 20 years and are not like super influential people. I looked into the whole healing case, like who's being healed and why. I did find some patterns. It was shocking. I looked a long time and I couldn't find anything. There are healings of all types of illnesses. Injuries, minor illnesses, colds, flus, infections, to serious diseases like diabetes, diphtheria, tuberculosis. I mean, you name it. Tumors. And often they won't heal people until the very last second. When they're on their way to the hospital. One guy was on his way to the hospital for kidney stones. This UFO swoops down and circling the car and he's like, I'm feeling much better. And I'm like, who's being healed and why? I want to know. And it's equally divided between men and women. It's all over the world. It stretches back 100 years. It's still occurring. Old and young, different races. There's no blood type. That pattern that I could find.
But there were other patterns that you found?
I did find a couple of patterns. And one pattern that did seem pretty apparent was if you have a long history of encounters, your chances of being healed are much more likely. And of the 300 some cases I documented, I would say almost half fit that pattern. Maybe not quite, 40%. But another pattern, which I'm like, okay, what turned out really surprised me. And that was a person's profession, their job. Because I'd always ask that. I'm like, what do you do? Oh, I'm a social worker. Another person, I'm a social worker. I'm a social worker. I work for animal rights. I'm a doctor. I am a doctor, teacher. This sort of thing. So I started to look at that. I'm like, gosh, these are people who are doing good work for humanity. An inventor, police officers, this sort of thing, where people are doing good work for humanity in some capacity. Like the case for John Hunter Gray was when I first started to question this. He's a social worker who's had an extraordinary healing encounter. And he grew like 2 inches after his encounter. All his scars healed. His case is amazing. His feet grew. I found other cases like that, by the way, where people will grow after being physically examined.
That are in later stages of life? Or?
Yeah, they're not supposed to grow anymore, but they do. So yeah, there's a wonderful, wonderful healing aspect to encounters that's not talked about. I think largely because people were fear-based society, the media certainly, likes a lurid story. And UFO healings, people don't necessarily run to the therapist, to get hypnotically regressed over some traumatic incident. And I think they're also very reluctant to talk because it sounds nutty. And the last thing people want to be is ridiculed. I think it's widespread, honestly. I was looking at them, like all the major researchers have cases like these. John Mack, David Jacobs, Bud Hopkins, Yvonne Smith, Barbara Lamb, Tim Beckley, Brad I can go on. John Carpenter, all of them. Mary Rodwell, the guys in England, Timmy Good, Tony Dodd. So healing, humanity, is one of their agendas. I don't think they're here to take over. I really don't. They've been here for thousands of years. We know this.
They would have done it by now.
I would think so. I can't prove that because there are some unprecedented things happening. Yeah, we know they've been here for thousands of years from cave paintings and hieroglyphics and petroglyphs and Renaissance paintings and Middle Age wood carvings and so on. But starting in 1947, their superwave hit the US and the world, where UFOs started being seen in very large numbers, consistently, year after year.
Do you think that has anything to do with the nuclear age?
Yeah.
The atomic age? Yeah.
A lot of researchers have brought that up, and I think it does coincide. And some experiences have been given that message very specifically, that messing around with many have gotten this message. Messing around with nuclear power is causing problems far-reaching places, other dimensions. So we're messing around with things apparently, according to the ETs, that we don't understand, and it's causing damage in areas that we're not aware of. So this has caused a huge interest in us and all the ET races to come surrounding our planet in very large numbers. I think this is unprecedented in human history. We don't have any reports of large-scale abductions. There is some evidence that people have been taken on board in the past, historically speaking, but not like this. No, this is new. Starting in around 1950, 60s even. So there is an agenda with these hybrid babies, I think, that we might not know what it is. I know David Jacobs has kind of talked about they're coming, they're coming to take over our planet. In my mind, they kind of already have, because if they're genetically altering us, are they incarnating through us? Are we aliens? If there are human-looking aliens, where did we come from? Why are they so interested in us? They're very interested in all things human. They're very interested in our emotions. They're studying us intently.